We'll wait for a few more minutes. We're just waiting for our guest speakers to come in. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're going to shortly begin. We're just waiting for all of our guest speakers. Welcome, Mr. Godrej. We'll begin in a few minutes.
Yeah, no, I'm going to disconnect the old one. Okay.
I'll keep the music going till we wait for a few more minutes. It's day one, so everyone's just getting used to the technology and coming in. We'll be a little bit more empathetic in a few more minutes. Almost there, 30 more seconds, and we'll begin with a nice warm collective centering and start the RSD9. Great. So let's begin here. My name is Itika, and me, on behalf of our entire team and family of the National Institute of Design Ahmedabad, extend an extremely warm welcome from all parts of the world to all of you. I'd not like to say good morning or evening because we're coming from many, many time zones. So let's just welcome everyone. We're doing our systems conference on well-being, so we thought it's only ideal that we actually start our conference every day with a nice centering as a group. So what if you're not in person together? We can still be collective in spirit. And that's why I'd like to invite you all as the Chief Centering Officer for the day to come together with me and get centered. I'd like you all to sit in a nice, comfortable position, hoping you already are. Just make sure your backs are straight. So your head, your heart, and your gut is in one straight line. Keep your feet grounded or crossed, however it's comfortable. And with that instruction, I'd like to invite you all to close your eyes. You can shut your videos if you'd like, but definitely just play along for this first day. Let's start with closing our eyes. Quickly checking in on ourselves. How are we feeling? Any tensions anywhere? Anything feeling strained in our body? Let that part a little loose. Send a little breath of air there. Make sure you relax your shoulders. And most importantly, make sure there's a nice and pleasant smile on your face as we do this. Let's begin with taking a nice, comfortable breath in as a group together, as long as you'd like. Hold it inside for a few extra seconds and exhale. One more nice, beautiful breath in. Feel that cold air go inside. Hold it there and exhale. And one more breath in, just another final one. Nice and deep. Holding it inside and exhale. And with our closed eyes, I want all of you to imagine all of us, all 100 and something of us or more, standing next to each other, shoulder to shoulder. Our brains, our minds are really, really interesting organs. Imagination comes easy to all of us. So just imagining all of us in this group, everyone who's here in the RSD9, to come together and imagine standing shoulder to shoulder, almost feel the other one's shoulder next to you. The skin of your arms to your left and the skin of your arms to your right. That little warmth of someone standing on either sides to you, slightly touching and just knowing that they're there. And this big human chain from all across the world that we've just made, feeling the part, the strength, the optimism of this group. Let's all collectively set an intention. I want you all to imagine from here on, how do we start working towards a world we all want to see? Just imagine that world that you'd like to see from here on, and through this conference, we'll find a way to get there. It could be small elements in that world. It could be about how it looks, how it smells, how people and things and beings and everything resides in it. But it's a vision that's yours. And with that shared vision and collective well-being of all of us, one final breath in, nice and deep, the longest you've taken in a day. And we exhale. And whenever you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you for joining us in this. And once again, a very, very warm welcome to all of you. I'd like to pass on the mic now to our Honorable Director, Mr. Praveen Nahar, to take us through the inaugural session. Praveen, over to you.
So, warm welcome to one and all at the 9th edition of RSD hosted by NID. Due to ongoing pandemic, we are all virtually, and many of us are very far from each other. But I think Ithika just brought all of us together and far closer to this. Last few days, in spite of we being far, we have been attending a lot of workshops of RSD, and RSD had already begun on Friday. RSD Symposium is a series that started in 2012 with the intention to promote and foster emerging practices and develop theories for systemic design, for service systems, social systems, policy development, and complex contexts. So RSD symposiums are organized with the sanction, guidance, and assistance of this recently formed Systemic Design Association, which was formed last year. NID has been part of RSD family since its second edition in Oslo, and we have been, our students and the community has been participating, and we are happy to be hosting RSD. As you see, there is a virtual exhibition at NID. All of you can relish and walk through the experience of RSD when you get time. I just wanted to, on this occasion, because people have joined from all over the world, I would like to give a brief historical context of design and design education in India and about NID. NID was set up in 1961 under the Ministry of Industries based on foundational report titled the India Report, put together by iconic designers Charles Henry Eames in 1961. More than 50 years of its existence, NID has had remarkable journey of exploration and discovery that was informed by the spirit of India. Today, we have 20 diverse design domains offered at graduate and postgraduate levels and at the doctoral programs also. NID, we also produce significant output of work in design consulting, publishing, research, and promotion. So in the 1960s, design practices and philosophies of HFG Ulm had influential role in the founding of NID. The pedagogy of Ulm that was influenced systemic inquiry. In the early 70s, one witnessed the first generation design teachers. On the right side, you can see many of them of NID and its graduates who became teachers in NID. They contextualized design practice, systemic thinking, and design components in the education at NID. Since the late 70s, a lot of work was grounded in the community engagement. The Javaja project was one experiment on the Rural University by NID and the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. It was an initiative that people in drought-prone district of Rajasthan and aimed to address the issues of hunger, poverty, and deprivation. It integrated many aspects of craft, heritage, culture, social structure, design vocabulary, and designs, NID's design inheritance. Javaja is a good example of long-term intervention in complex socio-technical systems. So NID pedagogy with its real-life projects provided exemplars to the world through their design approach that witnessed the scope of design and opened the meaning and interpretation of design for development. We have been practicing systems-oriented design at NID for many decades across disciplines. And we have been developing a unique way of looking at complexity of the world around us and how to practice so-called sense making. We actively work with real-life stakeholders and co-create design interventions while being aware and mindful of interconnectedness and opaqueness. We actively employ research through design and co-create interventions which are participatory in approach. The outcomes are not limited to numbered. We look at creating products, services, frameworks, policies which are emergent in future and have a narrative. The outcomes. So these are the examples of the projects. This is a project delivered to looking at juvenile justice system in India. The projects which can lead to an inquiry to decode empathy, which is one of the most crucial design tools. The project aims to challenge the barrier between children and policymakers in order to inculcate a greater sense of belonging among children in their own city through their active involvement in decision-making process. So coming back to idea of RSD, as we all know, in these unprecedented times, this year's conference theme, which is systemic design for well-being from human to humane, befits our lives as we are living in this very moment. Being humane is marked by compassion and empathy, not by humans, living beings and our cultures, but also our natural world and surroundings. RSD9 explores the connections between the well-being of our bodies, surroundings, and planet. It also sets the stage for translating the need for well-being to move from an individual scale to planetary scale. Design for well-being is evolving. In this evolving future will forever emergent, open-ended, and in flux, firmly rooted in understanding that well-being is holistic for entire hyperconnected world where humans are but one of the part of the whole. So RSD9, we are open to provocations and discussions of all kinds. RSD9 brings together over 50 live presentations, over 10 tracks and group discussions on design outcomes and programs informed by research, real applications, practices, and the problems in the unbounded complexity of social and ecological systems. There are a wide range of themes: ecological and circular economies, flourishing society, health and well-being, health and healthy society, methodology, philosophy and theory of systemic design, design for sustainable ecology, co-design for inquiry, collectivism, and citizen movements. Of course, what will be missing? And we will hope that we will get opportunity to meet in the beautiful city of Ahmedabad next time. So acknowledging and thanking all keynotes, plenary session speakers, presenters, workshop facilitators, complexity map makers for their contribution to RSD. Our gratitude to SDA board, scientific committee members, NID community, and colleagues, volunteers, and participants. Thank you, and we will meet and see each other during the exciting journey of RSD in coming days. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Praveen. That was a wonderful introduction. And with that, I'd like to pass on the mic to the activity chairperson of NID, Mr. Tarun Deep Girdhar. Tarun, could we have you on the stage?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you, Itika. Thank you so much. Just a minor correction. I am chairing the education activities of NID Ahmedabad and across all our 3 campuses, which is Ahmedabad, Gandhinagar, and Bangalore in down south. A very, very warm welcome to all our friends who are present here. I am very aware that you guys are all across different time zones. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to this amazing group of plenary speakers, workshop moderators, distinguished guests, and more importantly, each one of you guys who are participating in this for our common love of the well-being of humanity and everything else which it comprises of. I am recalling a few words which Lord Buddha, ancient Indian philosopher, he had mentioned that eventually everything connects. And this particular statement has been rechristened and made popular by different peoples. Even Charles Eames also had, very strongly emphasized that in the context of design, eventually everything connects. Perhaps he was talking about material, economics, the business of conducting things, the consumer, the manufacturer, but the last 6 months in our lives have been unprecedented, and various degrees of lockdowns and unlocks have led us to a great amount of insights into how there have been so many things which we have been taking for granted in our own lives. And the last 6 months, not only in my own personal experiences, but also based on my conversations which I have had with my students, we've come to a greater understanding of how things are related to each other, and how there is a system, or there is a huge network of smaller activities which are connecting to each other to ensure even that small plate of food on our tables. And this could not have been more truer than today. I'm quite happy and honored that the National Institute of Design is host to the 9th edition of RSD. And as my director has already touched upon, that despite having 20 different specializations, sometimes the world looks at it as 20 different verticals, but the nature of our pedagogy is such that we create platforms and encourage students to, cross over these academic boundaries and collaborate with each other to create designs, to create systems, to create whatever we may call it, to create things which are much larger than an individual's contribution. What I'm trying to also make a connection is that despite these 20 different specializations of design which we have at NID, at both undergrad and postgrad, the collaborative efforts often end up giving us things which are beyond the capacities of an individual particular department or discipline. And I'm quite happy that this particular 9th edition, we have so many workshops going on simultaneously, so many tracks going on simultaneously, that we are going to look at how do we collectively try and pool in our resources to face the challenges of the future, which many of us are not in a position to predict, especially after what happened in the last 6 months. So the timing is absolutely perfect, that we had plans for 2020, for 2021, and also for 2025. And now in October 2020, we are in a situation where we have to re-examine many things. And I'm really looking forward, like all of us, to the kind of ideas and the kind of thoughts which are going to be shared over the next couple of days. With that, I would once again extend a very, very warm and hearty welcome to each one of you guys. Thank you. Thank you so much, Itika. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarun. And thank you for that beautiful reminder of those little things and the connections between all of that we're all experiencing in these strange times of today. Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to now invite our Chairman of Governing Council for NID, Mr. Jamshed Godrej. Mr. Godrej, can I bring you to front stage, sir? Mr. Godrej, are you able to hear me?
You to unmute.
We'll just try unmuting you, sir. I think there's a little bit of a lag.
Of the NID. Yes, you can hear me?
Great. I think we're losing you in between.
Okay. Can
Great,
you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes, great. Thank you so much.
Okay. So let me welcome all our delegates from around the world on behalf of the NID Governing Council. As you know, I think of how design to India's, of course, is a very complex country. More systematic thinking in order to be able to help solve some of our biggest problems in India. Our biggest problem, of course, is poverty and development. This is an issue which has engaged us for the last 75 years in India. It's an ongoing issue. Much has happened in this period, but much more needs to happen. Also, we face enormous challenges of climate change. We face severe issues of water. I think our people have suffered enormously during the pandemic because of the way that the virus has spread. And I think it's only through design thinking that we can begin to think about the complexities that face us. And I think the complexities that face us are quite difficult to think about, get our arms around, and find solutions to. And I hope that conferences such as this will help us to understand them better and to find solutions. So once more, a welcome to all our delegates from around the world. And I wish you all the very best for the conference. And I look forward to its conclusions and its recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Godrej, for those wonderful words of hope. We really do hope with our knowledge and collective optimism of systems, we will find all those answers with time. I'd now like to invite the Systemic Design Association Chair, Ms. Sylvia Barbero. Sylvia, if you can hear me, I'd love to have you on the spotlight. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. Dearest, 1 year ago, I was pregnant in my 9th month. As a matter of fact, 3 weeks later, RSD8, my second daughter was born. In reality, any airlines allow me to fly to Chicago, unfortunately, neither my husband, of course. Even if my daughters are the best gift that I can ever receive, I was a little bit sad for not attending RSD, because my SDA and RSD are now like a family. And the conference is like Christmas, a couple of months in for the SDA that I'm chairing right now. The conference RSD is the main important appointment of the year. It is the moment of the year when finally we can meet in person. After many conference calls, we can share our last research, our experiences in the field and in the classes. It is the moment of the year when we can meet old friends, but also we can meet new gorgeous people. It is the moment of the year when we can share our thoughts on systemic design and learn a lot from the experience of the others. It is the moment of the year when we can discover another institution that believes in systemic design like we do, and potentially start new project together. Yes, I was sad to miss all of this. However, I was thinking and waiting for RSD9, the first edition in India at NID. I was totally excited about that. I knew Praveen in Toronto in RSD5, and I was happy finally to visit him and his institution and have the chance to know better all their amazing projects, research, lectures in systemic design. In the last year, as you can imagine, I was in maternity leave, so I lived all the new decision from a little bit of distance, but I can assure you that he and his valuable staff started immediately to work very hard in order to organize this conference and provide new input to the topic that are typical from NID, enriching a lot the program. Then the unimaginable happened after a while of good hope for the health of people in the planet with a great sense of responsibility and change. And instead of having in-person conference, we decided for this remote option. But let me say, it was not a plan B. It was designed again from the beginning as a remote conference with all the comfort and the potentiality that the internet can provide. The RSD, what RSD was in the previous edition is RSD9 is much more. You can enjoy all the content of the conference, the workshop, the exhibition, the inspiring keynote speakers, the plenary and the parallel session with continuous interaction on this actual topic that is the well-being of individual, but also of the communities. I really want to thank you, Praveen, and his team for the amazing work that they have done. And I hope, in any case, to come in person to NID. And thank you, all the attendees, and enjoy this amazing conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was a beautiful, beautiful share. We absolutely concur with you, and we're with you in, I think the way things are, we'll definitely still make the most in a new way of this conference, giving it new ideas and new heights. And with that, I would like to invite our two chairs for the first ever keynote session of RSD9 with a big hoot in our hats and a virtual clap, Mr. Praveen Nahar and Mr. Peter Jones, to please give a brief introduction for our first keynote speaker. Very honorable to have Ms. Vandana Shiva. Praveen, over to you.
Good evening, Dr. Shiva. I could not see you in the backstage because I was in the front stage.
Hello.
Nice to have you on RSD9 among the community across the world. And when somehow for this for the what is going on, we are not able to have you on at the NID campus, but in spirit, we are all there together. So I would like to introduce you to our participants very briefly. Dr. Shiva is the trained physicist, and she did a PhD in the hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She shifted her interdisciplinary research in science, biology, environmental policy, and in the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, Ecology in Dehradun for research on ecological and social issues. In 1991, she founded Navdhanya, 9 Seeds, a national movement to protect the diversity of living resources. In 2004, she started Bija Vidyapit in Doon Valley. And International College for Sustainable Living with Schumacher College, UK. And Dr. Shiva combines the sharp intellectual inquiry with courageous activism. As we all know, she has been extensively honored and listed in many magazines like Forbes, Times, Asia Week. So Dr. Shiva has been working in safeguarding Earth and its resources. She has been courtesing for the acknowledgement and respect for interconnectedness for all living beings on the planet as the most crucial development of the human well-being. Her keynote today, she calls upon discipline of design to wholly embrace the interrelated nature of planet to make a difference to the planet, our individual and connected well-being. Design for systems thinking has constantly endeavored to resolve understanding and action in complex world. With these words, I would like to invite Dr. Shiva, and I would like to invite Dr. Jones if you want to also say a few things before she starts.
Thank you, Praveen. And Dr. Shiva, thank you so much for joining us and for being able to make this visit under your schedule. I would just like to express our gratitude from Systemic Design Association and from RSD9, as I'd have to say you have been on our list of keynotes, of top keynotes and persons to invite for several years, for a number of years. We have continued to kind of hope that we might invite you, and with the with locating RSD9 at National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, so happy that you could join us in the Indian context to share with us. We really believe your work has a lot to say to the field of systemic design. I am personally really looking forward to your talk, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So with that,
over to Dr. Shiva.
You want me to start?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Praveen. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for RSD9. And while the chair was speaking, I was thinking this is a meeting of two nines. As you reminded the participants, Navdanya, the movement I started, means 9 seats. And of course, RSD9 is the 9th RSD meeting. I have been saving seeds since 1987 because I realized it was a wrong design to think that seed is a human invention, you know. And before that, I'd done a study in '84 on why had violence erupted in the most prosperous place of India, Punjab, where I had done my MSc honors in physics. That same year, there was a leak from a pesticide plant in the city of Bhopal. And in that study of the Green Revolution, which was totally interdisciplinary, and it was a very tricky study because there was a lot of violence. And I don't know, Peter, you might remember there was a Kanishka flight that blew up as part of the violence of that time over Ireland. It was flying from Vancouver to Toronto and on to London, and it blew up just above Cork. That was when security at airports started. Before that, nobody used to check. There were no security machines. There was no police. You just went straight onto the fight. That year, '84, made me look at the design of agriculture. And monocultures, for me, are not the design of well-being for the earth or for the farmers or for people. We right now have massive protests in Punjab again, like they were in '84, against new farm laws that would intensify even more the centralization and corporate control of agriculture. So when I realized that companies wanted to patent seed, I said, I'm going to save seeds. But, you know, I had a very, very mundane name for the movement. It was Save the Seeds Movement. till I traveled to a remote tribal area in Tamil Nadu border of Karnataka. And I was doing seed collections. And here was this farmer who had 9 crops in his field. Now that to me was absolutely pleasing to the eye and pleasing to my ecological sense. But when I said you're growing 9 crops, he looked at me with total disdain, you know, that I wouldn't know 9. Yeah. And he said, yes, Nathania. And I said, you talk as if there's something deep about this. And he said, don't you realize that the cosmic balance, because we assume 2 shadow planets to work out astronomical calculations, right? So the 9 planets, the 9 crops in my field, and our health are all one continuum of balance. So I got this amazing design lecture from a tribal peasant. And that's when I shifted to naming our movement Navdanya rather than just saving the seeds. And it is very often that deep design I have learned from ordinary peasants. My early activism began with the Chipko movement, where a resistance, a design for resistance was evolved by my sisters in the mountain. I come from the central Himalaya, and I'm right now in Dehradun, my old home. And the design of forestry, commercial forestry that the British had introduced was basically an extractive design, that what matters is what you can take out. The forest is a timber mine. Because when you look at ecosystems and you look at nature only as sources of raw material and extraction, you then want to not only reproduce that monoculture of the mind, as I have called it in one of my books, you basically think that diversity is a problem. And diversity is then turned into a disease, whether it's in the forest or on the farm or in our gut or in our culture, what we wear or the way we make our clothes. I remember there was a beautiful song, I think by Pete Singer, of houses on the hillside, and they all look like ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. But just look at the diet around the world. It's all ticky-tacky and it all looks just the same. So for me, design for well-being is understanding the life of living systems. How are they organized? And then your design is co-creation with living system. It's not an imposition. Absolutely indifferent to how the system works. This thinking that for me is now my ecological way of thinking was also my training in physics. My thesis on non-locality in quantum theory was really based on famous Einstein-Podolsky Rosen paradox, which basically said that unlike physical particles where this bottle and this pen are separate things, and we assume they're not connected, the minute you go to the quantum level, then a particle that has been a particle and it's separated, the 2 particles actually never get separated, even if they are light years away. And that is called non-separability and non-locality in quantum theory, which creates the uniqueness of a whole different paradigm, a paradigm of complexity, of paradigm of interaction. There's a very crude way in which it is talked about as observer creates the observed. No, the observer interacts with the observed. And depending on how you interact, you will see a wave or you will see a particle. So design is designing with co-creation. Rather than imagining that the earth is dead inert matter, mere raw material to be extracted, people are mere objects to be pushed into a certain design of clothing, a certain design of housing, a certain design of food, certain design of cities. That objectification, for me, is the beginning of violence. And I wrote a very early book in the 80s called The Violence, Staying Alive, in which I have worked on the epistemology of violence. When you take a living system and define it as dead, and then you treat it as if dead, it is dead, you will never design for well-being. You will design for ill-being. And it is not an accident. As the introductory statement said, we are in the midst of a pandemic. It is totally a result of designing for ill-being. How on earth could we create an agribusiness model that has to constantly invade into new territories, into forests, and then push viruses into the human community? We know in a world that is non-separable, that whether it is a quantum or it is pandemics, they come from an interrelated world. As my dear friend Mei Wan Ho, who wrote a book, and she used to get so excited discussing her book with me, an amazing thinker. She's no more, she died of cancer, but she's written a book called The Rainbow and the Worm. For those of you who are interested in the quantum phenomena in living systems, you can look for it. But this is what she said, that life is self-organized from the tiniest molecule all the way to the planet. This ranges from the physics of sustainable systems to the naturalistic ethics universally adopted by cultures of the kind of farmer who taught me about 9 seeds. And it is always about designing with life, for life, and therefore not doing harms. Because if something's living, then the first thing you try and understand is what its living patterns are. The second thing you do is design your actions so that you do not cause harm. So in a quantum coherent universe, because her thesis is that the reason right to the molecular level, there is constant interaction and harmony created every minute, is because at the tiniest level of life, there is quantum coherence. And this coherence can only be part of a design of well-being. In a quantum coherent universe, all beings are both localized as particle solid objects and delocalized as quantum wave functions spread ultimately throughout the universe. This was my thesis on non-locality. Hence, all beings are mutually entangled and mutually constitutive. Thus, harming others effectively harms ourselves. And the best way to benefit oneself is to benefit others. The pandemic is a result of harming the species, the animals in the forest, harming the indigenous people, and that harm has come back to humanity. Climate change is the indifference to the limits, both at the micro level of the soil and soil orbit, the macro level of planetary boundaries, because of a shift that was made when first colonialism and then fossil fuel driven colonialism, coal and then oil, deepened the metabolic rift. Liebig, the founder of organic chemistry, he talked about the metabolic rift. It's a language he created, since then used to understand injustice, to understand other aspects. But in my thinking, the first metabolic rift is what I call eco-apartheid, the illusion of separation from nature. Apartheid means separation. In South Africa, the apartheid regime separated the blacks and the whites. But long before they created the apartheid regime by law in the 40s, they had created a law against Indians who were at that time professionals, like Gandhi had gone as a lawyer and was practicing. It wasn't even a British Empire when he was practicing. It was under many, many, many small regions, including the Boers. Because slavery had been abolished in America and around the world, indentured labor from India was being taken to substitute slavery. But there was a clause that 5 years later they would be free. So between the freedom of indentured labor and the professionals like Gandhi, a law was passed that Indians cannot practice law. They cannot go to the same schools. They cannot walk on the same street. They cannot look for trade, and they cannot be businessmen, because some of the most prosperous businessmen in 1905, 1906, which is when Gandhi started his first satyagraha, his first civil disobedience, to stop this racism against Indians. I'm mentioning this because there's a lot of rumors that he didn't take up the black issue. And the blacks, the land had been taken, but the laws to forbid them to be equal began only when South Africa started to set up mines and industry, and then they had to keep the blacks in their place. So there's a metabolic rift of ecological apartheid, illusion of separation of humans from nature. But this, because it was based on the violence of colonialism, created multiple other separations and metabolic rifts. A metabolic rift between people who are white. And if you look around you, I don't think there's a single country, not Europe, not America, I don't think Canada, I don't think there's a single country that is escaping the new violence of white superiority. Both between those who are trying to rise for justice, like Black Lives Matter, and those who feel under threat that justice is being sought for. And I watched on the screen how people are being killed in Denver, in Portland. So this was the kind of violence that wasn't supposed to exist in the 21st century. The separation on race, the separation between men and women, the separation between the new separations between religions, leading to all kinds of intolerances. And definitely, because of the design created by bias and an idea of an extractive economy, that the rural areas are for extraction. Yeah? The soil is for extracting fertility. The farmers are for extracting their share of wealth. And this then created the metabolic rift between the city and the country. But then it ruptured the central piece of connection between nature and us, between the city and the country, between the worker and others. And this is the interconnectedness through nourishment, through food, through nutrition. Every cycle, from the local to the planetary, is a nutrition cycle. Climate change is nothing more than the rupture of the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, because those who found coal buried deep in the ground, or oil even deeper, thought, now we can cheat the cycles. Or they forgot about the cycles and said, all we need to do is now work with an internal combustion engine and redefine every discipline, redefine efficiency. So you use more energy to produce things, including food, 10 times more energy to produce food than you get. But because you're using fewer people, that disruption led to the assumption that people are the problem. You need to reduce the number of people. So it was a design of disposability. And it's reaching its climax now, where there are people who think you can now have an agriculture. So far, agriculture reduced the population in the countryside and created all the problems of slums and urbanization and everything else. But now there's talk of farming without farmers. And no one has explained to me where all these people will go. No one has explained to me how we will maintain the metabolism of health. If on the one hand, the pandemics are a result of invading into forests and destroying forest ecosystems, and the viruses coming from the forest to invade into our bodies, the impact of the virus on our well-being is aggravated by another metabolic disorder, which comes from chemical food, junk food, ultra-processed foods. And all of this was supposed to be for improving the situation of people, more food, that was the claim. I have at least 5 books on this, from the Green Revolution book of the 84. I have a book called Who Really Feeds the World, a book called Making Peace with the Earth, which has gone through the science of what really is the food system. Now, the two basic things that maintain our body's metabolism are food and water. The two basic cycles that maintain the Earth's metabolism are the hydrological cycle, the water cycle, and the nutrition cycles. The rupture of both is the ecological crisis when we look at it at the level of the Earth. The rupture of both is not just the health crisis, but it is also the deprivation and dispossession and poverty crisis. Let me just give you a few examples. So, I don't ever drink from a plastic water bottle. I carry my little flask no matter where I am. It's wounded, it's all dented, but it is still saving me from perpetrating violence against the earth, against local communities. And I woke up to the violence of the plastic water bottle when I was invited in 2002 to a little village in Plachimada in Kerala. And I couldn't believe why they were calling me, but to celebrate Earth Day. So I went to find out. And here were 100 women and children, tribal women and children, and 500 policemen. And they were fighting against a Coca-Cola plant. And they said, this plant has destroyed our water, and we are walking 10 miles. And I find that the limit of women's being able to bear a burden of ecological destruction is the 10-mile limit. Every ecological movement I have studied or been part of is women saying when they walk 10 miles, enough is enough. We've got to redesign the system. And the women of Plachimada sat on a satyagraha, force of truth, in front of the Coca-Cola gate. And they wanted me to join their 1 year of protest on Earth Day. In one bottle of water, if you have a liter, 10 liters has been destroyed before that. But if you were to take a bottle of water, 90% of the cost is the plastic making of the bottle, because they're getting the water for free by stealing. And every year right now, billions and billions of bottles are being thrown away. 9 billion barrels of oil are being used to make these water bottles. And here is an example of a bad design. We assume it is convenience. And everything that we've done wrong in design is for shallow ideas of convenience, which to me is making consumers totally lose their ability to think, choose, and live responsibility. But the plastic water bottle, chemical food, ultra-processed food, globalized trade with huge food miles are all part of a bad design. I already talked of the pandemic and the invasion of forests by agribusiness. Why are we growing GMO soya in the Amazon? Look at the perfection of the design of the Amazon, the lung and liver of the earth. And look at the design of a GMO soya. Yeah. You take a bean from Eastern Asia, you shoot with a gene gun into it, a toxic gene to make the soya bean resistant to Roundup, so you can spray more Roundup and make more money out of that. You can sell the soya bean, which now has a patent, which is something I've fought all my life, and thank goodness in India, we have prevented patents on live. We've managed to get Article 3J in our patent laws, which basically says plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions. And I was also asked by the minister decades ago to help write a law on seeds and plant varieties. And all of the officials were saying, but we'll have to give breeders' rights and monopolies to the companies. And I said, no, we don't. We've changed the WTO rules. And they must be designed to recognize that farmers are the first breeders. So Article 39 of the Indian Plant Variety Protection and Farmers' Rights Act says farmers' right to save, exchange, improve, breed, sell seed can never be taken away. And Praveen, because you are in Gujarat, you might remember that last year, Pepsi sued Gujarati farmers, 3 farmers, 4 crores, Crore is 10 to the 8 zeros for saving potato seeds. And when I heard about this case, I immediately sent my book, which is called Origin, the Plunder of Nature Knowledge in India. And in North America, it is published as Reclaiming the Commons. And it's really my 30 years of work on seeds, biodiversity, intellectual property rights, patents, breeders' rights, the Biodiversity Convention, everything that makes an impact on the design of our work. These laws protect our biodiversity. They are being assaulted very severely. But this book, when it reached the lawyers who discussed it with the judges, they started to talk about having to dismiss the case. And before that, Pepsi had to withdraw it. So let me just mention something as an aside on this. Just as a cell has a membrane to protect itself, just as our bodies have a skin to protect itself, it is in the design of governance to have regulations for protection of the earth, protection of workers' rights, protection of children, the rights of the child, protection of women, the rights of women, protection of the rights of human beings, written after Hitler's Germany and the wars. The International Declaration of Human Rights was a result of the violence of that time. And we said, never again. But we are coming back to say again and again and again. That's why we are at a very fragile moment. And most people don't realize that the food system that we have today is not designed for eating. It's not a food system for nourishing the world. It is not a food system for nourishing our bodies. It is a commodity producing system to also sell very costly inputs, whether the inputs are chemicals or patented seeds like the GMO soya, or inputs like herbicides and glyphosate, and big machinery, for which half of the European budget goes for CAP and big machinery. 700 billion is the subsidy for an unviable industrial agriculture system. 90% of the corn and soya is being grown for biofuel and animal feed. It's not feeding people. That's why hunger grows. 1 billion people are hungry. The World Food Programme just got a Nobel Peace Prize because they're warning that to the billion hungry, a 250 billion will be added because of the lockdown, loss of jobs, loss of livelihoods. And if we continue to go in this design, we're going to see 300,000 deaths every day for lack of food. Now, to me, that's not a very compassionate design of how to live. In the first introduction, mention was made about how poverty and development are India's big challenges. They weren't India's challenges when we governed ourselves. India was the biggest economy of the world. We were 25% of the world economy before we were colonized by the British. And I would suggest to you all, just reading my dear friend Utsa Patnaik's essay in a book called Agrarian and Other Histories, revisiting the drain or transfers from India to Britain in the context of global diffusion of capitalism. That's a short period of British colonialism. $43 trillion was transferred from India to England. This was extracted from the peasant in the form of lagan. And this extraction then left the peasants to hunger and starvation. And we lost 60 million people to famine in the British time. The Bengal famine was the last big famine, but we are creating conditions where famine could return to the world. And because we are deregulating at the same time and destroying the obligations of governments to ensure the right to food of all its people, or the right of farmers to grow food. You know, India's current protests are farmers saying, we are the food sovereignty of India. We feed India. And India's 1.3 billion people are fed by small, tiny farmers. And all the data is showing the smaller the farm, the more it produces. So much work for you designers to see how the design of the small farm actually makes for the potential of co-creation between the earth, her creativity, and the creativity of the farmer. Large farms do not have the potential for co-creativity. They have to substitute care with instruments of violence. Agrochemicals, like Roundup, spraying pesticides, throwing fertilizer, and you can read many of my books to see every one of these chemicals came from Hitler's Germany. IG Farben was the cartel that made them, and Standard Oil and IG Farben worked together. Rachel Carson, in her book Silent Spring, talked about how companies that had got used to making money and profits during the wars could not give up that habit. So Albert Howard, who wrote the book Agricultural Testament, when he was sent to India to improve India, and that's another word, you see, with a colonizing mind, you always want to improve. And co-evolve with them and co-create with them.
The internet.
It looks like Dr. Shiva is facing some issues with the internet. We'll try connecting with her offline as well.
We'll give her a minute and hopefully she'll link back in. So is burning down the World Wide Web as we're online. I hope she's right back.
Yeah. Dr. Shiva, I'll just unmute you.
Yeah. So much of the migration and refugee crisis is related to the destruction of the capacity of the land and the soil to support people. That's why they're moving. Or the economy to support people. I've advised Mexico, and I was there for a hearing where, because of NAFTA, so many livelihoods are destroyed that 1/3 of the economy of Mexico within a decade had moved to crime. Because if you lost your land, you're no more a peasant. Where do you go? You move to crime, which is why the drug cartel has gone so big. The disappearance of women has gone so big. And these are things we need to always see in the interconnectedness of design. I mentioned the chronic diseases, which is most of the chronic diseases are metabolic disorders because of food, diabetes, obesity, cancers because of toxics, neurodegenerative diseases because the metabolism of our gut microbiome has been absolutely devastated. And everything that happens outside to the biodiversity on the land happens inside us to our gut microbiome because they work together. They're supposed to be in coherence with each other. On the other hand, when you start to design for, the agrarian system that has been designed is designed for ill-being of the planet and people. What we've been doing through Navdanya over the last 3 decades is designed for well-being. And now all the research is showing that when you do organic farming and do biodiverse intensive farming, and you allow photosynthesis to play its role, to pull the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, you allow nitrogen fixing crops to play their role to pull out the nitrogen from the atmosphere, we can, if we turn 10% of the planet to organic, reverse the buildup of greenhouse gases that have accumulated. And meantime, of course, then we have to get out of the fossil fuel age. We can stop the species extinction on the Navdanya farm. And I hope when the lockdown is over, we are offering our courses on Zoom right now, but we actually have an Earth University. If you go to the Navdanya website, you'll find the Earth University courses. We hope when the lockdown is over, some of you will be able to come and work with us or visit our courses or visit the farm to see how design for well-being is not something you put together. You facilitate it. You catalyze it, because living systems have their own potential to evolve. You don't engineer a machine. You co-evolve with a living system. So we saved seeds and we planted seeds, and now they're butterflies and pollinators, and our, they contribute 1/3 of the food. We've done a lot of research on assessing how biodiversity systems compare with monocultures and chemicals. We could feed 2 times India's population with nourishing food, with biodiversity and no chemicals. Our farmers are earning 10 times more by shedding chemicals, taking control of their seed, taking control of their markets. And finally, our research on the soil has shown that there's been in these 20 years a 100% increase in soil carbon, 100% increase in nitrogen, but zinc is shot up, magnesium is shot up, and each of these micronutrient disappearances from the soil is leading to metabolic disturbances in our body. Zinc deficiency, depression; magnesium deficiency, attention deficient disorders. Now, the design of the earth, the design in the seed, the design in the plant, the design of our bodies is so complex, so sophisticated, that the best we can do is work in harmony with it and do the right thing. That is design for well-being. Design for well-being is an ethical project. The design for well-being is an ecological project. The design for well-being is taking care of the future, because when we don't leave an livable earth for future generations, the young teenagers will march. The design for well-being is joyful, creates beauty, and it gives satisfaction that we work with the truth of how nature functions. We don't work against it with our post-truth theories. People think post-truth only happens on bad TV channels. Post-truth is happening with bad design. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva, for the enlightening views and ideas around well-being, and very, very apt for the conference to begin. And I would like to invite Peter.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shiva. We have so many questions that have been bubbling up in the chat, and in reviewing those with the team, I'd like to provide those in no order. Some of these are very big questions, but let me start with Tima Bansal's question. I love the notion that people are entangled and mutually constituted, much like quantum particles. However, the quantum insight is a metaphor of what we experience at a more macro scale. It's powerful. What are the principles of entanglement at our scale? Is it a biophysical system effect? You're arguing there is something more spiritual, as unseen, unmeasurable, much like at the quantum scale.
No, it's also at the biophysical state. I mentioned very clearly the nitrogen cycle. I mentioned the food as a currency. Now, of course, in Indian philosophy, we know that everything has multiple energies. But there's enough of the nutritional flow that you can measure. That's what we've done with our soil. That's what we've done with the nutrition per acre in our shifting from yield per acre. So it isn't mystical. It is totally measurable, but not in a reductionist mechanistic way. You have to have systems thinking that the flow of materials, the flow of energy is the entanglement. And this flow is what holds life together. This is the web of life. And between human beings, it is also the same flow. The fact that billions are hungry and more are going to be hungry is a rupture of our thinking, of our entanglement. The fact that people are marching against each other in North America, which of course began its economy with slavery and the cotton empire, but so much happened in the centuries between. Why are we reducing ourselves again to the crudest elements of separation when we've had all the learning of entanglement.
Thank you. Let me, Ojaswi Gupta asks, generational phenomena like the violence you mentioned toward ecology is observed as cyclical in nature, as like the changing yugi. Is there a peak or trigger in the near future that you envision that might bring a shift to the status quo significantly?
I would not equate what happens in nature where there is, a leaf falls from a tree, but a new leaf also comes. That there's total coherence between living parts of systems. From what biologists have told me, we are new people. I don't know how, every few hours, all our cells are changing. And therefore, this idea of fixedness of stuff, of things, is where we get stuck. Of course, there's a renewal of life constantly, including in the same thing, what looks like the same thing. But the intergenerational issue is a very different issue. All cultures had a generational recycling. My own son was brought up very much by my lovely dad. And even today, my son is so grateful for all he learned from my father, which is much wiser than what he could learn from me. And it's that metabolic rift between generations, that children, grandparents have no connection. And now we have another discourse of, and I've had to debate economists, I've had to debate prime ministers who talk of parents blocking the opportunities of their generations because the parents are fighting for labor rights and pensions. And they are able to take care of their jobless children, unemployed children, because of their pension. And they've tried to put this as an intergenerational conflict. Human beings are born, human beings get old, and learning from each other is a very important part. And therefore, I have organized not only Earth University, but Grandmothers University. I work with tribal women to let the 80-year-old woman teach the younger women, because there's a forgetting taking place. There is nothing like there'll be a tipping point when it'll get so bad. Everything's gone so bad and there's been no tipping. There's only a change in thinking. And consciousness is a change in thinking. A shift in paradigms, a shift in worldview, a shift in consciousness is the shift in design. Yeah, from being part and participant of a process of ill design where you are also an inert object, to becoming an active agent of participation in co-creation. That is the shift.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a great question on violence against nature, essentially, from Vinit Soneji. Speaking of violence and separation, what are the areas in which you feel are currently a threat to society or might disrupt the way we live today? Is it technology, as it promotes biases, or the extraction economy, which has no ethics but to make money? How do you see this at a systemic level? What changes do you perceive?
So extractivism is a system. Yeah? Regeneration, cycling and recycling is another system. I call one the extractive economy when it comes to economy, call the other the circular economy of life systems. But you could apply exactly the same logic to technology, the extractive technologies. Yeah. So genetic engineering, what does it do? Can it create anything new? No. It takes living seeds and living microorganisms, extracts a gene from the microorganism, shoots it into existing plant cell. It didn't create any of those two things. Its only invention is the shooting of genes across species boundaries. This is extractivism. That's why it's violent. Because to me, nonviolence, with all of my now decades of work, is nonviolence is recognizing the self-organized systems that life is, from the little seed and the little microbe. And that's why when I quoted Maywan on the quantum wave coherence, you could talk about it as self-organization of quantum coherence. This recognition then says, this is a living being. And I must know the living being. And I must relate to the living being as a being. You know, why are we talking of well-being? The being must have wellness, you know? And so they are beings. Now, beings were made to disappear from the world in the fossil age. There are no beings. Look at the vocabulary. Find me the word being in any language of the fossil fuel age. And that's why I've said the fossil fuel age didn't just give us climate change and global greenhouse gas emissions and global warming and wildfires and hurricanes. The fossil age gave us a fossilized mind, the mechanical reductionist mind. And I think that's the deeper problem, because it's that which is crippling us from seeing the violence and avoiding the violence.
Thank you. I have a question from Sandra Waddock, perhaps related. Can you say more about how we can reclaim commons? And there's another question that might be some that I'd also like to work in, maybe as a follow-on from Maya Narayan. How does scale sit with sustainable living? If yes, how?
Yeah.
First on the commons.
Okay. So for the first question on commons, you know, if things are not separate, you know, billiard balls for Newton or ballistic, you know, shooting cannonballs, that was their mindset, the mechanical mindset. And mechanical philosophy came from that idea of separation. When things are separate, there's nothing in between, right? There's no relationship. But when you're interconnected, then everything that connects creates a commons. So it isn't an accident that at the time where our kind of countries, India was being colonized by the British, within England, the British rich were enclosing the commons. And it took 2 centuries of fights of the peasants, 2 centuries of resistance against the enclosure of the commons. And the enclosure of the commons had 2 ideas. First, to get the land to produce raw material, you know, to put sheep. I remember who's the writer who said, sheep eat men, you know, everything was put under sheep for the wool in the factories. But the second thing was to get cheap labor. You know, peasants growing their own food, you couldn't exploit them in the mines and the mills. So all of this metabolic disruption between the value of what you produced and who gets it are all part of deep thinking. For me, the commons is all the spaces of interconnectedness. And everything that's vital to life is part of a commons. So water is a commons, biodiversity is a common, knowledge of biodiversity is a commons. In contemporary societies, health and education are commons, energy is a commons, mobility of the kind that sustains communities is a commons. The commons is everything that sustains life, social life and the natural world. And the commons requires that we function as a community. I've written in many of my books, there's a book of mine called Earth Democracy, that there's a space beyond the market and the state. Because right now the two have become one and the rest is being forgotten. But the rest of the space is the space of community and the space of the commons. And it's not an accident that Margaret Thatcher, when she started to put the first structural adjustment in place in England, she said there is no society, there are only individuals, because atomizing society is vital to a project of extractivism. On the issue of scale, of course, scale matters. Because if design is about relationship, then living relationships can only be lived at a certain scale. I gave the example of the fact that according to the FAO, 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms. According to Navdania's research, the smaller the farms, the more it's dense, biodiversity-wise. The larger the farm, the more its intensity of fossil fuel use and chemical use. So when you move up in scale, you move up in carelessness. When you move in scale at the level where design for well-being can be lived, then there is a scale that puts a limit. But that doesn't mean there's a limit to how much food we'll have. It doesn't mean it limits the amount of clothing we'll have. No, all it puts a difference to is a limit, a boundary condition to units of production and consumption. But when you add all of these up, they add up to more. Otherwise, why would 80% of the food come from small farms? Or to go back to the gut microbiome. You know, we think we are bodies, that's it. We are separate from everything else. No, we are only 10% human cells. We are 90% other beings. Therefore, we are interbeings. Now, that 100 trillion microbes in your gut are super self-organized. And how you eat makes a difference. They organize us. We don't organize them, except by destroying them if we eat bad food. So scale, and I learned this, and maybe this should be the last thing I'll say. When I realized Monsanto wanted to own the seed, and they wanted an empire over life, I said, how do you deal with this? And I thought of our freedom movement, and I thought of Gandhi pulling out the spinning wheel. And I thought of how maybe the seed could be today's spinning wheel. And when Gandhi was laughed at, to say, how do you think you'll get freedom from these small pieces of wood? And he said, these small pieces of wood put together by the last woman in the poorest village will make that woman a freedom fighter. And when the weakest woman is part of our freedom movement, we will be free. It's not big weapons that brought us freedom. So I realized then that scale means you are small in terms of care and doability, but you're super large because millions of spinning wheels is a very large freedom phenomena. Millions of farmers having seeds in their hands is a new freedom. Millions of healthy soil microbes means fertile soils. Trillions of our healthy gut microbes make healthy people. So smallness is not static smallness. Smallness is interconnected smallness, which makes for large. And a healthier large, a large of well-being than a large of ill-being. And I will end with a beautiful quote of Gandhi that has been my deep inspiration always. He said, I do not see the world as a pyramid where the top crushes the bottom, crushes the Dalits, crushes the women, crushes the landless, crushes the worker. I see the world as ever expanding, never ascending oceanic circles, where the largest circle embraces all within and give it strength. So circle in circle in circle, microbe in microbe in microbe, these evolutions of self-organized systems growing into the large in metabolic balance and metabolic order. After all, when we build up the soil healing, the climate healing, you begin with a small piece of land and make that organic. But billions of farmers doing that can heal the entire big planet. So I think we have to think non-hierarchically, non-one-dimensionally about scale. We have to think of it in the design of recycling and cycling and interconnectedness. And then an entirely different mental framework gets created.
Thank you. Thank you for those. Can we keep you for 5 more minutes? That's
sure. I was looking at the watch that we are at 6:30, but if you all, if it's possible, yeah, from my side.
We have maybe two. I wanted to ask about designers too, but before what are so I want to just close with questions about what does this mean for us in terms of more, let's say, practical implications for the scale of design. And your insights just now have suggested that what ought we to do in a world that is now conflicted between the scale of the global and the level of action. So globalization has led to some new colonization of the information commons and of governance. And there are new forms of governance emerging that can do those scale. How should our governance evolve, in your opinion?
Well, you know, I think well-being is about living systems, yeah? Well-being is about children who are happy and healthy. Well-being is about those who don't having mental problems because they've been locked down for too long or lost their job. Well-being is about everyone having food. Yes, it's true we are in a different context. We were in a different trade context with globalization and the WTO, and I picked on the seed to address that global problem. Yeah. So it isn't that from the small you can't begin to address the big. And when Paris was sort of teetering, the Paris Agreement wasn't being reached, the Americans were holding the rest of the world ransom for 4 years. Nobody knew whether there will be an agreement. Not that the agreement is very powerful, because Copenhagen was the legally binding agreement and this one is the voluntary agreement. And I did a big garden action in Paris. I said, we will plant gardens everywhere. And this is a movement I've continued. Gardens of hope everywhere. I do it every day with the women I work with. That, you know, my little garden is small, but 100 gardens in a village that are all taking care of the earth are better than one large farm that is destroying the earth. And since there's a limit to how much you can actually do with the limitations of your body, you must respect that limit while being conscious of the interconnectedness of your actions to multiplier effects. Today we are in a digital world. I would request you all, please look out, you know, Navdanya International, another organization that is international, because in India we have a Navdanya Trust. We are releasing a report on the new empire that's being created, precisely on the new globalization. And it's on every part of the economy that my dear Mr. Bill Gates is taking charge of. From the seed to the agriculture, to eating impossible burger that will make our poor gut microbiome even sadder than it has been with a McDonald's burger, health, education, engineering the planet to solve climate change, geoengineering it's called, or dealing with the problem created with Roundup Ready crops and superweeds by pushing species to extinction, which is called gene drives. We are releasing this on 14th. There will be a release with authors from all over the world, and then it will be available on the Navdanya International website. We will then be, of course, talking. I mean, so on the seed issue, it's the same issue we've been doing. Save your seeds, keep them in your hands. Multiply the seeds, defend the seeds, and spread them as a commons. On food, grow your food, eat your food, know the food farmer who's growing your food. On climate change, do better science. Yeah? Creating artificial volcanoes and throwing iron findings in the ocean is bad, irresponsible science. And gene drives is nothing but Hitler on a global scale. Pushing people to extinction in Hitler's concentration camps was the ultimate unacceptable violence. Pushing species to extinction and trying to get, by bribes and influence, votes of UN systems that are supposed to regulate this, and all in this report. So we are in a new, digital empire. There's a brilliant book by a Harvard professor, Susanna Zoboff, on the new design of surveillance capitalism. We should take it very, very seriously, that we are the new mines, yeah? Not the gold mine, not the coal mine, not the bauxite mine. We are the mines. Our data is the new raw material. So it needs a lot of very, very creative thinking, a lot of creative designing, a lot of courageous coming together, because it takes courage at a time when you're not supposed to even meet with each other. Yeah. And I hope we'll have a time beyond Zoom. I hope we will be actually physically be able to go hug each other, because that's the world we have to create.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva, for a wonderful start for RSD And on behalf of NID and the whole RSD community around the world, I would really grateful that you could find time and share, fantastic food for thoughts. There is a lot of takeaway, and we definitely look forward to engage with you. We would like to have you on at NID, or maybe we'll bring our students to your to Navdanya, and it's so inspiring to have this to have you on the at RSD.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Shiva.
you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Oh, appreciate you so much. Thanks for the talk. And we have a fantastic discourse in the chat, which we ought to find a way to share.
Yes.
Please, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Of course. Yeah, thank you.
So over to you, Tika.
Great. Thank you, Praveen. Thank you, Peter. I'm a little overwhelmed right now from that beautiful chat to actually speak much, but for all of us, this is just the beginning of what we have packed in for all of us over the next 5 days. You can all take a quick 15-minute break right now. We're running about 5 minutes overboard, but that's okay. So in about 15 minutes, we can all essentially gather in the respective tracks that we're excited to listen to, and we'll have our track presenters. On the screen, you will be able to see the information of the tracks. The first track's on ecology and circular economies and flourishing society. The second one's on health and healthy societies. You have the links to these in Studio 1 and Studio 2. I've also dropped them in the chat. And if you ever get lost, you can always find us in the reception Zoom area. Let's just play around through these rooms just like we were in a physical space. If anyone needs a break from the tracks, you can always come back to the auditorium and we can do an informal networking with each other. Thank you, Praveen. Thank you, Peter. We'll see everyone.
So auditorium will be open.
Auditorium will remain open for the rest of the day.
So anybody can walk in and make
Yes.
it.
Yes.